Let's talk about save scamming, the allegedly awful and boring way to play games, where you reload a save whenever something doesn't go as you want. Specifically, I want to look at how it applies to stealth games, and question whether developers should even try to prevent it. I won't be going over the obvious reasons to allow the player to quick save whenever they want. Yes, playing a game for half an hour before getting a sudden phone call or a knock on the door sucks if you can't save and exit. But I'm going to discuss it from a much narrower, and admittedly more subjective point of view. That of a ghoster. I've been a fan of stealth games since I was a kid. Splinter Cell was one of my favorites, but I used to knock out every guard I came across. It wasn't until my third or fourth playthrough of Chaos Theory, carefully backtracking through an area I had already cleared, when it hit me. Why am I sneaking? There is nobody here who can detect me anymore. Realizing that, I've made a decision to play the game while keeping the enemies around, and it ended up being a much more interesting experience. From there, it was only natural that I would also decide to try and avoid being detected, going through each mission without anyone knowing I was there. Depending on how you look at it, discovering this playstyle has either made stealth games infinitely more enjoyable to me, or completely ruined them, because now I am unable to enjoy a stealth game if I don't ghost. I tried going back to a more improvisational playstyle, forcing myself not to load a save when I get caught, but it's no longer satisfying. I know some of you can relate, but most of you probably don't. Only a few of my friends get the appeal of ghosting, while most prefer rolling with the punches or knocking out every person in the game and storing their bodies in a single room. And that's cool. This isn't about ghosting being the correct way to play stealth games. But if I get spotted, and I know I could have avoided that, I am no longer happy with my run and would rather try again. But, by its nature, ghosting relies heavily on trial and error, and this is where I think any attempt to restrict the ability to quick save doesn't actually have the intended effect. Now, why do developers try to restrict it? There is certainly more than one reason. One of them is to add extra tension to the initial playthrough, so that you can't just save before a situation you deem risky. Maybe it's to teach the player new skills. Being forced to deal with the enemy upon getting caught will eventually make you better at combat and improvisation. And of course, it's to add challenge. As I've heard repeated a million times, well, it's just too easy to reload when you get caught. But all these reasons, I think, are secondary. The main reason, which all others hinge on, is that developers want the player to engage with as much of their game as possible. They want the player to not only be stealthy, but also experience the thrill of the chase. And I can understand where they're coming from, but let me tell you about how I experienced a game which tried to do that. Gloomwood. I'll say up front that I love Gloomwood and highly respect its developers. And what I'm about to describe doesn't even apply to the game anymore, since in one of the latest patches, they've given the players an option to enable quick saves on any difficulty. I'm just using it as an example, because that's the game I have experience with. In case you're unfamiliar with how its save system works, you can normally only save at specific spots by using phonographs. On the highest difficulty, you also need to find wax cylinders to save, which come in limited supply. On the lowest difficulty, quick saves are enabled by default, but you also get fewer enemies and they are more lenient. Needless to say, I prefer having challenging enemies, since otherwise sneaking around them is a lot less interesting. Now, I am aware that while Gloomwood is inspired by Thief, it's not a Thief clone. I recognize that it's part survival horror, and had it been just that, I'd be perfectly fine with the save system as it is. But Gloomwood is also a stealth game. It has shadow-based stealth and enemy awareness mechanics. Its level design offers plenty of opportunities to sneak around enemies without having to confront them. It's quite obvious that Gloomwood's developers want stealth to be a viable option, even if other options also exist. I think a more accurate comparison to be made here is not Thief, but actually Dishonored. In Dishonored, combat is entirely viable, but the game also presents you with the stealth option pretty much right from the start. Whenever a game does that, I always choose stealth over everything else, and try to ghost the game if it's even remotely possible. So when I played the very first build of Gloomwood's early access, I already knew that I wanted to ghost it. Having played the demo, I knew it would be viable, and playing it, I realized that it was pushing me out of my comfort zone hard. I was frustrated at being caught over and over, especially when it happened after I had already snuck around 5 other enemies. But did I engage with more of the game as a result? No, I just kept loading my last phonograph save and trying again. Now, if we define save scamming as loading a save each time something goes wrong, then I have to say Gloomwood's save system didn't prevent me from doing that, and it didn't reach its goal if that goal was to make me roll with the punches. And I'm not saying a game pushing you out of your comfort zone is a bad thing, I'm just wondering if save restrictions are a good way to do it. Even if we forget about ghosting for a moment, I have to question whether save restrictions really do make the player engage with more of the game. If experimenting with the game's systems means potentially losing progress, why would you do it? Eventually, you just settle on a relatively safe playstyle and try to avoid taking any risks altogether. I have to imagine that I'm not alone in thinking this way, but I'm operating on a hunch. I would posit that no amount of save restrictions can make the player abandon their playstyle, and that most of those who play Gloomwood the quote-unquote intended way were already going to do that. Others would either stubbornly stick to how they want to play, or maybe even skip the game. But I want to ask you, my dear viewer, have you ever had an experience that disproves this? Have you ever adjusted your playstyle because you couldn't freely save? I'm really curious, because I'm also open to the idea that I just have double standards, or whatever you want to call it. I recently put out a ghost run of Amnesia the Bunker, but as I noted in it, I don't think ghosting is the best way to play it. It was a fun experiment, sure, but I only did that after playing it casually a bunch, and I also didn't decide that ghosting is the only way I'll ever play it from that point on, like I did with Chaos Theory. And it's definitely not because of save restrictions. The Bunker has a save system similar to Gloomwood's one, where we can only save at a specific spot. But that wasn't a big problem when I decided to ghost it, partly because there is only one enemy, but more importantly, because I already knew the game. Had I tried to ghost on my initial playthrough, it would have probably been quite miserable. But I didn't, because I went into the Bunker expecting it to be a survival horror game, but not a stealth one. To wrap up, I want to leave you with this. If a game has unrestricted quicksaving, and you feel that it prevents you from enjoying it to the fullest, you always have an option to ignore it. But in a game that doesn't have that, there are no options. And if by any chance you are a stealth game developer watching this, may I suggest using the carrot rather than the stick? What if, instead of removing quick saves, you offer some bonuses to those who don't use them? Maybe quick saves could work like cheat codes, disabling in-game achievements and trophies. I have a hunch that Gloomwood will do something like that, since I can't imagine a run of it with quick saves enabled could possibly count as a legit way to beat the game. And I'm actually looking forward to beating its highest difficulty without quick saves, but only once I know what I'm doing and can come up with a plan. But for learning the game, figuring out how the AI works, and trying out strategies to sneak past them, I'll be using quick saves, and I am eternally grateful to the developers that I can now do that. Apologies if this video was a bit all over the place. I wanted to talk about save restrictions for a long time, because I don't want them to become the norm in the stealth genre. And you know what, I'm not a fan of forced ghosting either. If getting caught results in an actual game over, that sucks way more than save restrictions. I like my playstyle, but I wouldn't want to force it onto anyone. Thanks for watching.